Hello, my dear listeners. Glowing star, thank you for being here today. I'm so grateful for your time and support, it truly means the world. If you love stories of resilience, courage, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe, share this video with friends, and leave a comment. I wish you strength, peace, and inspiration as you listen. Now, let's begin. Folded Hand Sparkles. A Teacher's Life. Daniel Ward was a high school history teacher in a quiet town. He loved his students more than the dusty textbooks he carried because for him, history wasn't about memorizing dates, it was about understanding choices. He told his students, every era leaves us questions. How we answer them shapes who we are. Daniel was respected, even loved. Parents trusted him, students confided in him. His small classroom smelled of chalk and old maps, a place where young minds learned to ask why instead of just what. He lived modestly, walking to school, reading in the evenings, drinking coffee too strong for his own good. But life can turn cruel without warning. The accusation. It began with whispers. Money missing from the school fund. Someone forging signatures on checks. Fingers needed someone to point at, and Daniel, quiet, solitary, with no family to defend him, became the easiest target. At first, he laughed it off. Me? Steal from the kids? That's absurd. But the whispers became statements, and the statements became charges. Evidence appeared, fabricated but convincing. Papers with his signature. Witnesses swearing they saw him near the office late at night. Daniel swore his innocence, but in a system that cared more for quick answers than truth, his voice was drowned. The trial. In the courthouse, Daniel stood in his plain suit, pale and stunned. The prosecutor painted him as a desperate man living beyond his means, taking advantage of the trust of children. Each word was a blade. His court-appointed lawyer barely fought. It's a losing case, the man muttered, flipping papers without reading them. When the verdict came, guilty, Daniel's world collapsed. 10 years in state prison. His reputation destroyed. His students watching from the gallery, some crying, others too confused to speak. As the judge's gavel fell, Daniel realized his history lessons had come true. Choices matter, but sometimes the choices aren't yours. The prison gates. The first day behind bars was a storm in his chest. The clang of gates, the sharp bark of orders, the stench of sweat and fear. Men with tattoos eyed him like prey. Guards barely looked at him except to shove him along. Daniel, the quiet teacher, was nothing here. Just another number. He told himself, survive. Just survive. But prison isn't a place for the gentle. Within days, he became a target. His glasses were stolen, his food tray knocked from his hands. Laughter followed him down corridors. At night, he curled on the thin mattress, listening to shouts, fights, and weeping echo through steel. He thought of his classroom, of his students' faces, of the blackboard where he used to write questions no one else dared ask. He whispered to himself, I didn't do this. I'm not guilty. But the walls didn't care. The first blow. One afternoon in the yard, a group of inmates cornered him. A tall man with scars grinned down. Teacher, huh? You're gonna learn new lessons now. The first punch knocked Daniel to the dirt. The second split his lip. He didn't fight back, couldn't. He curled, trying to protect himself, until guards finally broke it apart. That night, his reflection in the metal mirror was almost unrecognizable. Bruises bloomed, one eye swollen. He realized something bitter. If he didn't change, if he didn't learn to stand, prison would devour him. For the first time in his life, Daniel the teacher had to become Daniel the fighter. A spark of resolve. The next morning, his ribs aching, he forced himself to walk straighter, to look less like prey. He began observing the prison the way he used to study history. Patterns, alliances, who controlled what. He learned quickly, in here, knowledge wasn't power unless you had the courage to use it. He started with small steps, doing push-ups in his cell, jogging in place, practicing breathing until his panic shrank. He remembered the words he once told his students, "History favors the prepared." Now he was preparing for survival. The prison had broken him down, but it had also lit a fire. Daniel knew he couldn't stay the same man he had been. To survive injustice, he had to fight injustice, both inside himself and in the walls around him. And somewhere, in the future he could barely imagine, he would find a way to prove his innocence. But first, he had to learn how not to break. The morning after the beating, Daniel woke to light slicing through the bars and the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. He swung his legs over the side of the bunk and wrote rules to himself on the inside of his mind, because a teacher without a chalkboard will make one out of air. Stand like you mean it. Predators love a slouch. Learn the map. Every room has its currents. Don't swim blind. Use words only when they can lift something. Silence is sometimes a shield. Train the body. Train the breath. Train the focus. Never owe. Never gossip. Never beg. He started with the smallest of rebellions, posture. Chin slightly tucked, shoulders down, eyes open. In the chow line he kept space without shrinking. On the tier he walked at the pace of someone who knew where he was going, even when he didn't. The men noticed. They notice everything. Miguel, who read people like books. History man, someone said that afternoon in the yard. You're walking different. Daniel turned slowly. The speaker was in his 50s, silver in his buzz cut, forearms wrapped in old tattoo lines gone soft with time. He sat on a bench like it had agreed to be his. His eyes held no mockery, only measurement. I'm trying, Daniel said. The man nodded once. Trying is a start. Name's Miguel. He tapped the bench. Sit, if you know how to sit without taking. Daniel hesitated, then perched on the edge, leaving respectful inches between them. Miguel's mouth twitched, approval. You a teacher? Miguel asked. Was, Daniel said. History. Good, Miguel replied, glancing at the track where men walked circles like weather. History is about rules people pretend they didn't write. This place has those too. He taught Daniel the etiquette no handbook admits. Never touch a man's property unless invited. Never break a line. Return what you borrow. Keep your eyes on your own plate. Speak only the truth you can defend with your back to a wall. Fighting? Daniel asked quietly. Miguel studied his face. Fighting is a language. Don't try poetry your first week. He stood and squared his shoulders. Keep your chin tucked. Hands high if you must. Small steps. It's the feet that save you. They shadowboxed in slow motion under the watch of a bored guard. Miguel corrected posture with a nod, never a touch. Again, he said, as if he'd been a coach in another life. Breathe when you move. Think like a teacher. Lesson plan first, execution second. Daniel smiled despite the sweat. You owned a bookstore, didn't you? Miguel's brow flicked up. I did, he said, almost tenderly. Then the wrong ledger and a cousin with bad timing. Nothing more dangerous than paperwork. Paperwork. The word pulsed like pain. The library and the weight of paper. A week later, through the slow magic of Miguel's whispers and a counselor tired of broken mop handles, Daniel got assigned to the library. The room smelled of dust, old glue, and tired hope. Metal shelves sagged under the weight of paperbacks. In the corner, A cramped legal section, 3 decades behind but still breathing. He lifted a reporter volume and felt the gravity of it in his hands. Case names, citations, facts that tried to stand upright. He turned pages as if they could bruise. In that room, Daniel felt the first glimmer of himself again. He reorganized a shelf nobody cared about and found out he cared anyway. He wrote a list of missing volumes and taped it to a desk that had never been asked to aspire. Men wandered in for magazines and left with dictionaries when he was done with them. "What's this?" one asked, confused but not unhappy, holding a book like a foreign tool. "Leverage," Daniel said. "Words give you length." Soon he was helping men write letters, sometimes to daughters, sometimes to appeals, sometimes to the version of themselves that hadn't quit. He read grievances for a guy who mixed up affect and effect and argued with a form like it might listen. He corrected punctuation where a sentence could accidentally confess. "Teacher," one lifer said one afternoon, tapping the legal shelf. "You think you can teach paper to tell the truth? I think you can teach yourself to force a conversation with it," Daniel answered. Truth shows up when it's cornered. The first time he stood. It happened in the chow hall, cement floor, metal benches, the sound of trays stacking like thunder. Scar, the tall man who had first bloodied him, slid in front of Daniel in line, bumping him hard enough to jolt the tray. "Watch it, Professor," he said, smiling with his teeth. A month ago, Daniel would have lowered his eyes, let it pass, paid the tax with silence. Now he set the tray down carefully, as if setting a demonstration on a lectern. He straightened, chin tucked, breath steady. "You bumped me," he said evenly. Not accusatory, not apologetic, a fact. Scar tilted his head. "You gonna do something about it?" Miguel was across the room, too far to help and too smart to try. The guards were within shouting distance and a lifetime away. Daniel did not step back. He let his hands rest open at his sides, weight on the balls of his feet, the way Miguel had shown him. "No," he said, "I'm not going to do something. I'm going to stand here." Something in Scar's eyes assessed the posture, the lack of flinch. A calculus ran. There are cheaper meals than a fight that might bring heat. "Stand there then," Scar said, with bored contempt that was secretly relief. He moved on, shoulders broadcasting victory to anyone who needed narratives to be simple. Daniel released the breath he'd been holding out of sight. His legs shook afterward, but he stayed upright until the tremor passed. In the library later, Miguel closed a paperback and looked at him for a long moment. "That was the right size," Miguel said. "Not a fight. Not a fold." Daniel nodded, throat tight. "I can't be prey forever." "You're not," Miguel said. "You're a person. Keep proving it to yourself." Teaching again. Word spread. The library had a teacher who made fractions behave and apostrophes confess their crimes. Men who'd laughed at the idea of a GED showed up at the door pretending they were there for the air conditioning. "Sit," Daniel would say, chalking invisible notes on a whiteboard that didn't exist. "Let's make angles be honest." They called him Teach, first with mockery, then with habit, then with a respect grudging enough to be real. A guard named Bell, stoic, precise, the kind who liked quiet more than power, noticed the change. Fewer fights on Daniel's tier. More men in the library during rec. He signed the pass slips without sighing as often. "You run a class now?" Bell asked one afternoon, eyeing the semicircle of chairs Daniel had coaxed into order. "I run a conversation," Daniel said. "Learning is just a long argument with your own assumptions." Bell's mouth didn't exactly smile. "Keep arguing, then. Even Harkin, The guard, who seemed personally offended by the continued existence of hope, left them alone when the men were nose down over worksheets. Cynicism respects order even when it can't pronounce it. Paper trails and knots. At night, with the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft snoring of a bunkie who dreamed in fragments, Daniel read case law until his eyes burned. He studied signatures, his own forged on the checks, and learned to see the tremor of imitation. He wrote a timeline of the school fund, deposit dates, petty cash withdrawals, camera outages nobody noticed at the time. He wrote to the district clerk for copies of board minutes. He drafted a motion with the help of a book 2 editions old and sent it to a court that barely let self-represented petitions breathe. He mailed his former colleague, Mrs. Patel, the only person who had hugged him outside the courthouse, and asked a question he hated asking. "Will you look? Will you believe me enough to look?" Weeks later, a letter returned, her handwriting slanted and sure. "I believe you. I always did. I kept copies of the grant forms. Something was wrong with the dates, Daniel. I'll send what I have. Don't give up." He read it 3 times and let the paper rest against his ribs like a hand. Miguel peered over a law book. "What is it?" "Evidence," Daniel whispered, daring the word to be true. "Or the beginning." The second rules he wrote on his skin. He added more rules as he got stronger. Routine is armor. Morning. Push-ups, squats, breath count to 200. Afternoon. 2 miles on the track, 10,000 small decisions to keep going. Evening. Read. Eat what fuels you, not what consoles you. Write it down. Memory is a generous liar under stress. Speak last in groups. Let the loud spend themselves. Protect the small wins. They train your mind to expect larger ones. He taught the men the same. You want to pass the GED? Make a list. Make your bed. Finish a paragraph without quitting. Your brain is a muscle. We hit reps. One man, Darnell, 22, with a thunderstorm under his skin, threw his pencil on day 3. "I can't teach. I'm stupid." Daniel slid the paper back gently. "You're tired. Those are different. Sit 2 minutes. Then we try again." Darnell passed the math section a month later. He cried like a boy and a man at once and hugged Daniel with the kind of strength that says thank you when words can't. Word passed again. The teacher made numbers cross the river. Mrs. Patel's packet arrived through legal mail. Copies of purchase orders, emails, a photo of a whiteboard from the PTA closet with dates scrawled in dry erase rush. Daniel laid them out on the library table after hours and traced the lines with his finger. If money went missing on the 12th, why was the software subscription charged on the 10th? The signatures on 2 forms were identical copies down to a stray ink blot, a mechanical reproduction, not a human hand. And the camera in the hallway had been down for maintenance on 3 critical days, documented by a contractor who happened to be the brother of the assistant superintendent. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was smoke that implied a room. He wrote to 3 innocence organizations, believing none would answer. He wrote to a local journalist whose column once criticized the school board for playing accountant with other people's faith. He wrote to the public defender office not to complain, but to ask for a copy of the discovery he had never thoroughly seen. Then, on a Tuesday morning as the library clock hiccuped at 10:02, Officer Bell stuck his head in. "Visitor for you," he said. "I don't have a visit scheduled," Daniel replied, puzzled. Bell's not quite smile flickered. "Maybe schedule is behind." Daniel followed him to the attorney booth, hands sweating despite the air conditioning's stubborn drone. On the other side of the scratched plexiglass sat a woman in a navy suit, hair pulled back, eyes like a field medic's, quick, focused, kind without softness. "Mr. Ward?" she said, lifting a folder. "I'm Ava Mercer. I run a small post-conviction practice. Mrs. Patel sent me your letters and the documents. I read your transcript last night." She tapped the folder. It was not a good trial. The world narrowed to the size of his chest. "No," he said, voice thin. "I don't take every case," she continued. "But this one, there are threads. I think they can be pulled. If you want me to, I'll take it. It won't be fast. It won't be simple. It will be work." Behind the glass, Daniel's reflection hovered over her shoulder, tired, older, but standing. He thought of the boys in his classroom who had learned to testify to their own futures in essays. He thought of Miguel's quiet nods, of Darnell's grin, of the rules he had written until they became skin. "Yes," he said. "Please." Ava nodded briskly. "Then let's begin. First, you'll write me everything you remember, not the drama, the facts. Names, dates, who had keys, who had access. I'll subpoena the original checks, get an independent examiner on the signatures, and ask for the maintenance logs on those cameras. We're going to rebuild the month money moved. And Daniel," she leaned in slightly, "you're going to keep breathing and keep teaching. Judges like seeing a man still being a man." He laughed, a small, disbelieving exhale that felt like sunlight. "I can do that." Bell rapped the door, politely impatient. Ava slid a card under the slot. "You'll hear from me in a week," she said. "Maybe 2. And if anyone asks what we discussed, tell them we talked about the weather. Because we did. It's going to change." The night he slept without clenching. Back in his cell, Daniel lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. The hum of the tier was the same. Radios murmuring, a distant argument about a game, the clink of metal cups. But the sound had a new note under it, like a string tuned half a turn closer to music. Miguel appeared at the bars at lights out, a shadow with a grin. "So," he whispered, "paper is learning manners." "Maybe," Daniel said, smiling in the dark. "I found a lawyer who knows how to talk to it." "Good," Miguel murmured. "Then keep eating, keep moving, keep being boring in the places that should be boring. Hope needs fuel." Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time since the gavel fell, sleep arrived without being bargained with. Prison hadn't changed its nature. The gates still clanged. The chow still tasted like apology. The air still measured men. But Daniel had rewritten his part in the script. He had learned to stand without fighting, to fight without rage, to teach without a classroom. He had reached for paper and found a hand reaching back. A head waited subpoenas, motions, hearings, words that would have to walk. But for the first time, the future wasn't a wall. It was a door with a hinge that might remember how to swing. 2 weeks later, Daniel received an envelope through legal mail. His hands shook opening it, not from fear, but from hunger. Inside were 3 pages of Ava's neat handwriting. "Mr. Ward, I've begun. The signature examiner agrees the checks were forged. The strokes indicate tracing, not natural movement. I've also filed requests for the maintenance logs on the cameras. As expected, the district is resisting, but resistance often means something worth hiding. Mrs. Patel is providing more records. She's braver than she knows. We will need affidavits. We will need patience. But I believe we can unravel this. Hold steady." At the bottom, Ava had written one more line. "History has always been rewritten by persistence." Daniel read it 5 times. For the first time in years, the word believe felt real. Trouble in the yard. But prison did not care about hope. Hope made you stand out, and standing out was dangerous. One afternoon, Daniel was walking laps when Scar, The man who had once beaten him stepped into his path. "Heard you got yourself a lawyer," Scar said, smirking. "What you gonna do, teach? Sue the whole world?" The men nearby watched like vultures circling. Daniel steadied his breath. "I'm going to tell the truth." Scar's smirk faded. He shoved Daniel's chest. "Truth don't live here." Miguel appeared at Daniel's side, silent as a wall. His presence was enough. Scar muttered something under his breath and walked away, but Daniel's heart kept pounding long after. "Lesson?" Miguel asked quietly. Daniel swallowed. "Hope draws fire." Miguel nodded. "Then shield it well." Paper trails. In the library, Daniel poured himself into Ava's assignments. He wrote every detail he remembered: who had keys to the office, what nights he stayed late grading, who handled the PTA money. He recalled how the assistant superintendent had once warned him, "Don't ask too many questions about the budget, Ward. Just teach your history." Daniel had thought it was casual advice. Now, he wrote it down as evidence. Night after night, he studied the legal texts. He traced patterns of corruption across cases, learning how power disguised theft behind paperwork. History repeating itself, just in smaller rooms. Ava's visit. When Ava returned, she brought a thick folder. Her eyes were sharper, her words faster. "We've got movement," she said through the plexiglass. "The handwriting expert's report is strong. Patel found minutes where the board approved expenses that never existed. And I tracked the contractor for those cameras. The same name keeps appearing in suspicious bids." Daniel's pulse raced. "That proves it?" Ava shook her head. "It suggests it. Courts don't like suggestions. We need a thread that ties it all together. Something undeniable." Daniel leaned in. "And if we find it? Then we file for a new trial." She paused. "But be ready. The district will fight hard. People in power don't like their stories rewritten." Pressure mounts. Word spread faster than Daniel wanted. "Teach's lawyer thinks she's gonna spring him," men whispered. Some mocked, others admired, some simply watched. The guards noticed too. Harkin sneered when Daniel walked past. "Don't get your hopes up, Professor. Paper lies better than people." But Bell, the quiet guard, stopped him one night. "I read about your case," he said gruffly. "If Mercer's your lawyer, you've got a chance. She doesn't waste time on fools." It was the closest thing to encouragement Daniel had ever heard from a guard. A betrayal. One evening, as Daniel was sorting books, a note was slipped under the library door. No name, just scrawled letters. "They're watching you. Stop digging, or you'll regret it." His stomach dropped. He showed it to Miguel, who frowned. "Fear is cheap ink. Someone wants to scare you. The question is, which someone?" Daniel burned the note in the library trash can. He knew one thing. He couldn't stop now. A breakthrough. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Mrs. Patel had remembered something. A janitor named Ellis who had quit suddenly after the scandal. She tracked him down. Ellis confessed in an affidavit. He had seen the assistant superintendent sneaking into the office late at night with files, and had been warned to keep quiet. Ava sent Daniel a copy. At the bottom, Ellis had signed, "I stayed silent too long. This man doesn't belong in prison." Daniel pressed his forehead to the paper, tears threatening. For years, silence had been his cage. Now, silence itself was cracking. The motion. A month later, Ava filed the motion. Petition for post-conviction relief. Daniel received a copy. Words marched down the page like soldiers. Newly discovered evidence, forged documents, official misconduct. The motion argued for a hearing, a chance to present the truth in court. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a door. The cost of hope. The night after the motion was filed, Scar and two others cornered Daniel in the showers. This time, he didn't just curl. He remembered Miguel's lessons: small steps, chin tucked, hands high. He blocked the first blow, ducked the second, shoved Scar back against the wall. The fight was messy, desperate, but Daniel didn't break. Guards stormed in, batons raised, and the fight ended in chaos. In the infirmary afterward, Miguel smirked at him. "You're not prey anymore." Daniel winced at his bruises but managed a smile. "No, I'm not." Closing of Part 3. Daniel had changed. He was no longer the quiet teacher waiting for someone else to rescue him. He had become a man who fought, in body, in mind, and on paper. With Ava's help, the truth was gathering strength. A hearing was on the horizon. And for the first time since the gavel fell, Daniel dared to imagine not just survival, but justice. But justice never comes without a final trial. Hello once again, my dear listeners, glowing star. We've walked with Daniel through betrayal, prison walls, and the slow fire of hope. Now it's time for the final part of his story. Before we begin, I want to thank you for listening. Your time, your support, and your presence mean so much. Don't forget to subscribe if you love stories of resilience and redemption. I wish you courage and peace as we finish this journey together. Folded hand sparkles. The hearing date. The notice came in a plain envelope, but it might as well have been gold. The petition had been granted a hearing. Daniel read the letter 3 times, hardly able to breathe. For years he'd lived with the taste of injustice. Now, at last, he would have a chance to speak. But prison didn't celebrate. Scar sneered. "Court won't change nothing, teach. You're stuck here till you rot." Daniel just met his eyes and walked on. He had learned not to waste words on those who wanted him broken. Preparation. Ava visited weekly now, sometimes twice. They sat across scratched plexiglass, paper spread like a battlefield between them. "We'll call Ellis as a witness," she said, tapping her folder. "We'll bring in the handwriting expert. We'll hammer the timeline." Daniel nodded, memorizing every detail. He knew this was more than his freedom. It was proof that truth could crawl out of the darkest corners and survive. Miguel offered advice in his own way. "When you stand in that box, don't look like a victim. Look like a man teaching a lesson. Judges respect teachers, even when they don't admit it." Daniel smiled. "That I can do." The night before the hearing, Daniel barely slept. He lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding. He thought of his classroom, the maps, the chalk, the eager faces of students who once believed him. He thought of the gavel, the verdict, the years stolen. He whispered to himself, "I will not waste this chance." In court again. The courthouse smelled the same, old wood and cold stone. But Daniel was different now. Stronger, sharper, no longer the frightened man in a borrowed suit. He wore prison blues, but he walked tall as he entered the courtroom. Ava stood beside him, confident and steady. The judge, stern and watchful, read through the petition. "We'll hear the evidence," he said. "The evidence." Ava called Ellis first. The old janitor's hands trembled as he spoke, but his voice carried. "I saw the assistant superintendent in the office late at night. He told me to keep quiet. I quit because I was afraid. But it wasn't Daniel Ward. He never touched that money." Then came the handwriting expert. He displayed blown-up images of Daniel's forged signature. "This is traced. No natural variation. It's a copy, not a signature." Finally, Ava presented the maintenance records, altered dates, suspicious contractors, all tied to the same official. The prosecutor tried to object, tried to discredit, but Ava was relentless. She dismantled each argument piece by piece, her voice cutting through the lies like steel. Daniel's turn. When Daniel took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He looked at the judge, at the gallery where a few former students now sat as adults, faces filled with hope. "I was a teacher," he said, voice steady. "My job was to protect knowledge and guide young people. I never stole from them. I never would." The truth was buried under paperwork, but the truth never stopped existing. "All I ask is for you to see it." He paused, then added, "I've spent years in prison for something I didn't do. But I've learned one thing. History is written by those who refuse to give up. Today, I refuse to give up." The decision. The judge took days to deliberate. Those days felt longer than years. Then, on a rainy morning, Daniel was called back to court. The judge's voice was measured. "This court finds sufficient evidence of wrongful conviction. The verdict is vacated. Mr. Ward, you are hereby released." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. The chains were removed from his wrists. He walked out of the courtroom not as a prisoner, but as a free man. Aftermath. Outside, Ava shook his hand firmly. "You're free, Daniel. What you do with that freedom is your choice now." Miguel had been transferred before the hearing, but Daniel wrote to him later, "You were right. Fighting is a language. Thank you for teaching me to speak it." Mrs. Patel hugged him, tears in her eyes. "You can teach again, if you want." Daniel looked up at the sky, the rain washing over him like baptism. For years he had lived under weight, now he breathed without chains. A new lesson. Months later, Daniel stood not in a prison library, but in a community center classroom. Men who had once been inmates, young people from broken homes, and anyone hungry for learning filled the seats. On the board he wrote the words, "Truth can be buried, but it cannot be killed." He looked at his students, at their wary but hopeful faces, and smiled. "Let's begin," he said. Closing the story. Daniel Ward had been a teacher, a prisoner, a fighter, and finally, free. His journey was proof that even when the world turns against you, resilience, courage, and truth can carve a way back into the light. And so his story ends where it began, with a teacher standing tall, still teaching.